So good morning and thanks for attending the Resource Manager overview presentation. Resource Manager is a solution that allows you to integrate a lot of remote access information from employees that may not be part of the central head office but need to record information that ultimately finds its way into the back office of Sage 300. Sorry, I've got a issue here with the So good morning again, everyone, and thanks for joining us for the Resource Manager presentation. Resource Manager is an example of an application that allows you to integrate web-based technology through an employee self-service portal and capture information about employee expense reports, timesheets, PO requisitions, AP invoice requisitions, internal usage and custom requisitions, as well as leave tracking and overtime information, and directly update Sage 300 in the back office. For our presentation today, we're going to show you an overview of the timesheet and expense applications, and we can take any questions you have about the requisitions as well. Essentially what this does is allows you to capture information from a remote site or a remote employee, integrate that directly into an approval workflow within Sage 300 that allows you to get all of these documents approved based on roles that you specify for individuals within your organization. So as these documents are sent into the system, you'll be able to have supervisors, managers, and if you're integrated in with the project and job cost module of Sage 300, a PJC contract manager. You've also got the ability to add process information for putting in dollar value thresholds, let's say on expense reports, or any other conditions that you want to add as logic within the transaction process workflow. Notice that we can use email alerts for when these documents are submitted, rejected, or approved. And we utilize email templates so that you can customize the information that's sent out via email. Notice also that we give you options for variables, and you can embed a URL hot link in the body of the email so that as managers are approving these documents, they simply click on the URL link and they'll be able to approve the document on a tablet, on a notebook computer, or even a smartphone. Both iPhone and Android apps are available for the application. In terms of the integration, let's just take a quick look under the options to show you the various ways you can integrate Resource Manager into the rest of Sage 300. It integrates with the general ledger and accounts receivable if you need to bill any of the expenses or timesheet information that you track. It integrates with the project and job cost module. It can also integrate into AP invoices for reimbursement of expenses. And we can integrate with the Canadian payroll module so that you can record time card information directly off your approved timesheets. There's various types of configuration options for both the expense reports as well as the timesheets. I'm going to start with process transaction review of a timesheet entry, and then we'll also review the expense entry as well. If you are tracking timesheets, note that you can specify how often you want to be recording that time, whether it's hourly, half hour, or every 15 minutes. You can allow fractional time and also negative time if you need to back time out of a particular project or job that you want to record time to. Notice that you can have multiple timesheets per pay period or restrict that to just one timesheet per pay period. You can also allow time entry on a future date if you feel that's appropriate, and allow time on a holiday, a stat holiday like a Saturday, Sunday, or a Thanksgiving Day, or some other holiday in the calendar. You can also, as part of the approval workflow, allow the edit of timesheets and expense reports by the approvers, or you can simply reject them and send them back to the employee for review. So let's actually walk through a transaction process so you can see how this works. As I mentioned, this is the web portal that integrates directly into Sage 300. We're working on one central database, so there's no importing or exporting of this data. We capture it once in the portal, and then it seamlessly integrates itself into the Sage 300 back office. When you set up your employees, there is going to be some additional information that we need to track with respect to the employees so that we know how to process the documents that they're sending to us. And notice that the integration options here allow us to integrate with either PJC, Canadian Payroll, or both modules at the same time. In terms of processing, we would assign each employee to an account set, as well as a division, region, and department if you turn that code on. And you can also specify a management structure so that if somebody's reporting to a specific supervisor or manager, that can be recorded in the system. In terms of expense reimbursements, you can pre-assign the expense codes to employees, and notice that this will then determine the distribution into the GL account. So your employees won't have to remember the expense codes with the actual GL accounts. These can be pre-assigned, and that's what we mean here by saying yes in the regular column. You'll notice when I create a new expense report that these expense codes will automatically populate onto the expense form for the employee. It's a full multi-currency system, so we can record expenses in different currencies and reimburse in different currencies as well. So let's walk you through a couple of these transaction processes so you get an idea of how this would work in practice. I'm going to log in as an employee called Marilyn. Notice as well that if you're linked into multiple Sage 300 company databases, you'll be able to enter timesheets and expenses against the various companies by choosing the appropriate company when you log into the web portal. You can support single sign-on, so if an employee has a Windows ID and password, you can use the same Windows ID and password for the Resource Manager portal. Based on the web applications that you've licensed, you're able to determine which access various employees can have. So in Marilyn's case, she is able to enter expense reports, leave requests for sick time and vacation time, overtime, as well as timesheets. She can also raise PO requisitions for capital or expense service-based purchases. And in the case where you are managing projects, I'll highlight this quickly, but we won't have time for it today unless we get some specific questions. There is a separate project scheduling and resource planning component to the web portal. So whether you're using the project and job cost module of Sage 300 or the norming projects, which is also another component of the Resource Manager, you'll be able to use a Gantt chart and resource scheduling capability to assign tasks and resources to various phases of jobs and contracts within your projects. When we sign in, notice that the system also supports multiple languages. So currently we've got Spanish, French, Chinese, and English, and we're always looking to add more language sets as it becomes necessary. I'll also highlight the substitution capability, which means that at any point in time, if a manager is going to be away or an employee is traveling on vacation, they can assign their either approval rights or entries for timesheets, expense reports, leave requests, requisitions, or overtime requests to another employee within the organization. So in Marilyn's case, let's start with a timesheet. You can also publish historical information for the employee portal. So in this case, Marilyn is able to see all of the previous timesheets that she's submitted and have been posted through for recording against projects, jobs, or simply for payroll purposes. There's also status for approved, rejected, awaiting approval, or open. So when you create a new timesheet or expense report, you can simply save it in the system and come back and continue to add additional data to it. For our purposes today, we're going to start with a new timesheet entry, and notice that it automatically defaults in to the current period that we're in. In our case, I'm going to move back 1 week, and if we're linked in with PJC, there'll be a drop-down window that shows us all of the projects that Marilyn has currently been assigned to with the phase and task. If she's assigned to multiple tasks, you'll see that here as well, and you'll be able to choose from that. You'll also have various categories which would determine her role and ultimately the rate at which you're charging her time to a particular job. Because this is also used for payroll purposes, you can specify the pay code that applies to each line item on the timesheet, and that can include overtime and leave tracking codes as well, like sick time. When we enter, this is our standard timesheet, so we can enter time on any particular day. We can also add comments at any point in time, and these comments will be recorded against that particular cell and allow us to record the information. That information will be highlighted here through the blue star, and notice that when the cursor hovers over that cell, the comment will pop up. And this will also be visible for any managers doing approvals. Also note that I'm not able to enter time on Saturday and Sunday because those are stat holidays, and we've configured the system to not allow time to be entered on weekends. I'll quickly finish with the input of this particular timesheet, but the other option that we have in terms of the standard timesheet, we also have an in-out timesheet if you want to record start and stop time for a particular employee. So we'll save the spreadsheet and look at the attachment capability. At any point in time, you can attach documents in any format at all. So let's say we're working with a contract customer specification, and that might be something that needs to be recorded against this particular job. And as long as you've got the document scanned somewhere on the network, you're able to pick that up and attach it and save it with the timesheet. The same thing will be true with the expense report when we get there. So this is my completed timesheet. I would save it. Notice that I can create another timesheet off of this timesheet if I want to. So I can streamline data entry by doing that. When I submit the timesheet, notice that another button appears to the left called Approval Trail. This will highlight the number of steps that are required for this timesheet to be approved. Notice as well that every action has a date and a timestamp, and if they were substituted, that would be recorded as part of the workflow as well, and the system would automatically move the document to the substitute rather than the person who's been assigned under normal circumstances, in this case, Freddie. So I'm going to close this timesheet down, go back to the portal, and this time I'll sign out as Marilyn, but I'll sign in as Freddie. Now, as a manager, Freddie could have received an email notification based on the approval workflow to say that Marilyn has submitted a timesheet. He'll also, when he logs in, notice this little red bubble with the number 1 on his To Approved list icon, which also indicates there's a document that needs to be approved. So there's one timesheet that's been outstanding and awaiting approval, and he simply clicks on the link and he can view the information, including the note that Marilyn added, as well as the attached document for support. So you just simply click on the link, open up that document, and you can view it online. This document will also flow with the timesheet directly into Sage 300, so there you have a complete audit trail of each activity for every document. At this point, we could also click on the approval trail, and Freddie would be able to see if there's any other managers that might have been assigned to review and approve this document. You can also print if you'd like to, and then you either approve or reject with comments. Once you say OK, the document is approved. It's removed from the approval console, and because we only have one level of approval on the timesheet, it's now automatically ready to be set up within Sage 300's back office. By clicking on the timesheet batch list, you notice a message that pops up that says there's some approved documents that can be transferred from the employee self-service portal. Do you want to transfer them now? By saying yes, it picks up the approved timesheet and creates the batch entry within Sage 300. By opening up the batch, we can see all of the details that have been recorded from the timesheet. So the default description, timesheet entry with the period involved, it's already tracked as being related to a PJC job. The document number is the timesheet number 15, and all of the information on the project in terms of the customer that we're charging, the project phase and category, work breakdown structure, task and role have all been assigned automatically, including division, region, and the fact that this is billable, and that the pay code we're using is hourly. And then as we look at the individual transaction details, notice the comment has been picked up and assigned to the comments field. We know the pay rate, the approved hours, and the billing rate on this particular job. All of the rest of the hours that were recorded Monday through Thursday are here. And notice as well that the approval audit trail has been recorded and attached as additional information to the entry. So anyone within Sage 300 is now able to see when the document was submitted and then approved with the comments that were added and the date and the timestamp. I mentioned that the attachments would also be visible. So there's a separate page where we can open up the attachments and see any supporting documentation for the timesheet. We also support optional fields. So if there are optional fields, additional information that you'd like to track against these documents, timesheets or expense reports or requisitions, that's also possible within the system. If there's no changes to be made, you would simply close, but note that in the back office, you still have the option to override an approved timesheet if you give the accounting or finance people that ability. So even though it's been an approved timesheet, you still have the option to make any changes if necessary. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to post this timesheet. And at this point, I want to highlight the integration to the other modules within Sage 300. So you notice here that this entry has been posted, but it didn't actually create the PJC time card yet. And that's because in the system, when I set up the options, I didn't ask it to automatically create the PJC time card or the payroll time card. I said use the create PJC time card icon as well as the payroll time card icon. And what that's referring to is under periodic processing, we have a separate create PJC time card icon and a create payroll time card icon. If under the setup I had said that I want to create during posting, then as I posted that timesheet entry, it would have automatically posted and created a PJC time card. Likewise, it would have done the same with a time card entry in Canadian payroll. So instead, I'm going to walk you through the discrete steps so you get an idea of how this would work. So again, this will work for both expenses and timesheets. If I choose timesheets, I can put in a description and I can specify the date. So let's say this is the day 30th, and then I do a search. There's the recorded hours and cost. It's for timesheet 15, which is the timesheet that we just set up and approved within the portal. And I can open up the document and see the individual detail if I want to see that, including the approval audit trail and any attachments and optional fields. So you see how you can navigate very quickly and easily from these transactions back to the source detail as needed. So I'm going to go ahead and create, and it generates a PJC time card for me, and it will give you warnings about being out of date ranges for the project tasks that have been assigned. So now within PJC, if I go to the time card entry, there's an entry that's already recorded, timesheet 15, which was the timesheet that we had set up, and it's assigned to the contract, project, and category for the dates that we recorded that time. And we've also recorded the total cost. The time detail is here as well, so if you had individual line items going to different projects, that would be broken out here on the PJC time card. And this is where we allocate the billable hours, and we also set up the distribution to our wages and benefits GL accounts and any work in progress accounts set up against that project within PJC. And notice again that the comments flow through in any optional fields. So then we would simply post this transaction into the job to update the costs, and there's been absolutely no rekeying of the information. Just as we create the PJC time card off an approved timesheet, we can also create our payroll time card entries as well. So if we do a search again this time, we've got some additional details here. So there's timesheet 15 as well as timesheet 14. So we've got a couple of timesheets. And again, you could click on the document and go back to the individual detail. When we're ready, we would just go ahead and create, and it generates a payroll time card now in Canadian payroll. Now, some of you who might be familiar with PJC know that you also have the option to create a payroll time card entry from PJC. So you can update payroll from PJC. So this gives you flexibility on how you want to move the transaction process through Sage 300. In some cases, if you're using project and job costing, you would post to the PJC time card and then update payroll from PJC. But if you're not using project and job cost, you can just go directly to Canadian payroll. And now your payroll time cards will be listed here. And for the employee Marilyn, let's go back and look at Marilyn right here. There will be time card entries now that have been recorded. And there's the weekly time that we recorded from the 11th down to the 17th. So again, no rekeying of the data, but we set up the information for payroll purposes automatically based on the approved timesheet within Resource Manager. So it becomes a very effective way for you to track and record the information, get it approved, and then move it seamlessly through the various modules within Sage 300 based on your configuration in Sage 300. So the next step will be to look at the expenses, and you'll see how it's a very similar process to the timesheet. So we can move through this fairly quickly, and then I'll touch on a couple of other options within Sage 300 that I want you to be aware of, and then we can finish with questions. So in this case, it's an expense report. We click on the expense and click on New. Notice this time that it automatically populates air and meal expense codes for an employee based on the configuration of the employee register. In this case, notice as well that we have access to the currency. For each of the document forms, timesheets, expense reports, and purchase requisitions, you as the user are able to customize what appears on these forms. And all of that is based on access to what we call the admin portal. So this is setup options that you have within Resource Manager to control from a central location the setup of the users, the different language translations, and what we call routines. I talked about the fact that we have some other alerts in Resource Manager, so you can send out approval reminders, missing timesheet reminders, missing expense reports, and you can also specify the number of days. So that information will be visible somewhere on the portal, or you can send out email notifications. I also wanted to point out a schedules list. So the timesheet reminder could be set up as a schedule in the system, and this is where you would specify the frequency, the start date, or whether there's a particular day of the week that you want those reminders sent out. So if you do payroll on a Friday, you might want to send out that reminder on a Friday morning to make sure people are actually set up properly. The to-do list is another way to track outstanding documents that need to be approved in the system. And again, this is multi-company. So depending on which company you're in, you're able to do the approval from this to-do list, reject it, or transfer it to another manager if someone forgot to set up a substitution. And we'll look at this company here, and you'll see that there's a timesheet leave request and purchase requisition that's outstanding, and we could simply flag that timesheet and then transfer it to one of the other managers in the company to do the approval. So this will avoid bottlenecks in the system and make sure that transactions are being approved on a timely basis and updated to Sage 300. So coming back to the expense entry, we're going to set up the expense batch through the portal by creating this expense entry here. The other thing to note, so in addition to multi-currency, let's say that the meal was incurred in US dollars. Notice that it changes the rate from 1 to 0.72 because I've incurred this expense in US dollars, and $100 US is 138.81 Canadian. Reimbursable is here because in some cases your expenses are prepaid as part of a corporate credit card, so it would be something that you want recorded on an expense report but not something that's reimbursable. So you would have the flag to come in and say, no, this is not reimbursable. But it's still assigned to a project so that these costs get updated. And again, you can have comments. So this was a conference in Chicago, and this might be, dinner with a good client, and that's record. Now, you don't see tax here because the system's been configured to automatically calculate the tax that applies on meals and airfare. In other circumstances, you might want to actually set up tax as a separate column on the expense report, and you'll be able to do that. Again, we have the document attach. So you might say this is the airfare receipt, and that's something that you could then browse for and pick up and save that. And then you might also decide that you want to record another document as an attachment here. So we would do another attach and say this is the meal receipt, and again do another browse and pick up that receipt and save. So you have the option to save separate receipts by line item if you want on the expense report. We can also import credit card information. So if you have a source file from your credit card provider, you can download that and map it into columns on the expense report. I'm going to go ahead and submit this. And again, the approval audit trail will appear and Marilyn's expenses get approved by Freddie. Now we could go ahead and print this if we wanted to. And now I'll log out as Marilyn and log back in as Freddie. So just like we saw with the timesheet, we'll be able to log in. Freddie would have received an email. Somebody might have managed it through the to approved list or the to-do list on the admin portal, but we also have the notification here within Freddie's self-service portal. And in this case, it's an expense report, EV25, been submitted today, November 24th, and we can go ahead and approve, or we can click on the link and see the details. So we've got the breakdown for the expenses, the different currencies, the comments are flowing through, the attachments are here, so we could click on the attachment and open up the support for the meals and the airfare individually. So both of these are visible in the system, two different documents. And if we're okay with that, then we would do the same thing as before. We would simply approve it. And say OK, and it's removed from the portal. And in the back office then, when we open up the expense batch, we get the notification that we have an approved expense report. We say yes, and we want to now see the batch. And this has been set up in the system as an expense report to be reimbursed through accounts payable. So in this case, when we post the expense entry, it's going to create an AP invoice, which we can then pay. So your employee in that case would have to be set up as a vendor, and we will default that AP invoice number to match the expense voucher 25, which is our document number for this expense entry. We have the detailed line items, so we can open that up and see the different items that have been recorded as expenses, and in the case where it's a different currency than the home currency, you will see the exchange rate and both the source and functional amount. So we have a source 100 currency US dollar and a functional 138 Canadian dollar. The allocation for division, region, department, and if it applies to a project and a customer job, you will also see the allocation and any optional fields. Again, the GL account distribution has been assigned. This is billable and reimbursable, so all of those details are recorded. In addition, the comments have been recorded. So this information is simply flowing through from the approved expense report. And just like we saw with the timesheet, there's a copy of the approval audit trail with comments, also attachments. So again, we just simply click the preview button and we can see what's been assigned as supporting documentation for this entry. and the totals, including any allocated tax or recoverable tax, optional fields, and the tax authorities that apply. So at this point, if there's no changes, we would simply close the entry and post, and in this case, we're going to create an AP invoice. So my AP invoice gets created, and now within accounts payable, I've set up the invoice for reimbursement. This will be flagged as an EN expense batch, and the document number for AP invoice purposes matches the EB expense voucher number. It's broken out by GL account, and of course this is an open batch, so it could be edited if necessary. You also have drill down capability from AP back into the expense entry. So if you wanted to review the supporting detail, such as the approval audit trail, or look at the attachments again, you'd be able to preview the supporting documents